Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' Myofascial Release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my Myofascial Release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I am joined here by a very special guest. She graduated from occupational therapy school in 1988. She took her first MFR class in 1996. She is the owner of Monadnock Myofascial Release in Keene, New Hampshire. She's also known as a shamanic practitioner. It's my honor to introduce Molly McMillan. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I got connected with you through Rowena, who you've spent some time with. I think Rowena, before she moved to Las Vegas, started her journey in New York. And she says that you were one of the therapists who helped her develop her myofascial release. And it's just cool to kind of meet different people in this community, and you being one of the more established practitioners that I've heard about. So can you first start off by telling us about your story into becoming an occupational therapist?
Oh, sure. That's a good story too, becoming an occupational therapist. I went to college. Well, first of all, I'll say that I wasn't ready to go to college when I graduated from high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I came from a family, and my parents were very much, you're going to go to college. You don't get to choose whether or not you go to college. It's just a matter of which college are you going to. And I was a good girl. I was a rule follower, which you wouldn't know now. You wouldn't see that now, but at the time I was. And so I went to college, and I decided to major in pre-med because I did know I wanted to go into healthcare. And I thought, my grandfather was a doctor, so I thought I'll start as a pre-med major. And sure enough, taking all of that chemistry, I just was bogged down. And it wasn't until the following summer, before my sophomore year, when my grandfather, who was a doctor, passed away, and I was at his funeral, that I met someone he went to school with. And he was a dean at a medical school in Louisiana. And I told him what my interests were. I told him that I really wanted to work with the physical body, but I was also really interested in other aspects of the body, the human body, and a more holistic approach. And so he suggested occupational therapy. He said, I happen to know the dean of the occupational therapy school at the Medical College of Georgia, which is where I went to college. Why don't you meet with her? So I did. I met with her, and she told me about occupational therapy, and I visited a couple of different facilities, and I thought, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And I quickly moved into becoming an occupational therapy major. I transferred to the Medical College of Georgia to get my degree. And it was really great for me because once I decided what I wanted to do, I was just focused and everything just fell into place. And so I graduated in 1988 from occupational therapy school.
That's awesome. Now, something you had mentioned was that it seemed like you had this pressure to go to college. And did that align with you, or was it something that you did to more so appease your parents and their expectations?
I definitely did it because my parents needed and wanted me to, and I did not know how to rebel against that at the time. I couldn't imagine what would happen if I had said, no, I'm not going to college. I couldn't imagine what my life would have been like. So I just went.
I can relate to that. And that's because I am the youngest of four brothers. And in Asian cultures, education is held in the highest regard. And so all of my brothers had gone to college, and there was this expectation for me to go to college. Now, every Asian parent wants their Asian kid to be either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. And the doctor title, for some reason, carries the most weight. And I'll say for me, I just happened to be lucky in that I found my path, similar to you, of wanting to become a physical therapist. And because that's now a doctorate degree, that kind of checked off their box. And so for me, there wasn't a much of a friction between us because I was like, hey, the thing that I want to do, you have to go through college to become. Now, I ask your story because nowadays physical therapy school is extremely expensive. And most physical therapists want to go in an outpatient orthopedic setting, which isn't the most lucrative. And so it is hard for me now to say, yeah, you should become a physical therapist without trying to take into account the financial burden that comes with that. Because let's just say for physical therapy school, it's often over $100,000. And then you're getting a job that's paying maybe 60 or 70 as a new grad in outpatient orthopedic. That compounding interest for your student loans is something that people don't get away from. So, I think John now says, hey, if you want to do myofascial release, then become a massage therapist. It's like a $10,000 investment. And then, it's easy to make more than that as a self-employed or running your own MFR practitioner, and you're not having to swim in that student loan debt. Now, for you, being an occupational therapist, do you think that you would encourage students coming up who are interested, or would you kind of recommend, hey, maybe you should do the massage therapist background? You just need a license to put your hands on people. What would you say to them?
That's a good question. And when it comes to the financial implications that you're describing, because when you are in occupational therapy school, it's really expensive and it's a lot of time and a lot of money to get through there.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I learned so much in occupational therapy school and also working as an occupational therapist in traditional settings that really informed my practice. So it's hard for me to imagine not having that background, not having that information, that knowledge, that background to do what I'm doing. It's really challenging for me to think about that in that way. So I certainly know plenty of massage therapists who do amazing work, and they have massage therapy certificate or license and they do great work. So what would I recommend? I would, and this is definitely how I am, I would recommend that they follow their heart. They follow what they feel drawn to doing most. And I would explain to them that for me, this is the path that worked well for me. Now, when I was in school, it was a lot less expensive. So I didn't have to worry about what, students today have to worry about. The youth of today, my son's about to go to college. So I know what that's like. But I also can't imagine how my practice would be without all of the knowledge that I gained from working in all of those different settings and learning about working with different diagnoses and things. And it's kind of like, it is true that every time I work with someone, I let go of all of that, but it's still in there. It still informs me in my work. So to answer your question, I would say to the person, follow your intuition. What do you need? Do you feel that you need this information? Do you feel like you need to go to OT or PT school to get this information? And if you don't, if you just want to focus on myofascial release and that's all you feel you need, then go to massage therapy school and get that certificate and then pursue your dream that way.
I love that answer. I think it always comes down to following your heart, and that's your intuition. And, even though I would say, hey, swimming in the student loan debt is hard for a lot of people to think about, especially when you're just trying to get through school and you're not really thinking about the implications after when you join the real world, that if you had told the 18-year-old version of myself of saying, hey, don't do this and incur all this debt, there's nothing that would have convinced him otherwise. Like, I also am very happy that I'm a physical therapist, and it does bring this level of education that obviously ties well with myofascial release. John Barnes, he's a PT. Rob Rob Maggio is also a PT, and I know seeing those guys being physical therapists was an easier transition for me to step into myofascial release. Now, something that you had mentioned was you had these experiences in a traditional occupational therapy setting that influenced the kind of person and therapist that you are today. Can you tell me and the audience what those experiences were like of working in these traditional occupational therapy settings?
Sure. Well, when I was in Atlanta and I started working as a temporary therapist, I was working in a lot of different settings. I it was really good for me because I got to experience what it was like to work in an acute care setting one day, and then the next day go to Shepherd Spinal Center, which is one of the top spinal cord rehabilitation centers in the country, the next day, and just learn about what they do and how they work with people. And then the next day, I might work in a specialty hand clinic. And then the next day, I might go to a school and work with kids in a school. So all of that, just knowing how each setting worked with and approached the client population that they served was so informative. Some places I felt more of a sense of, oh, this feels really good. This feels like it's working for me. And of course, that usually meant that there was a community, there was collaboration. I had more time to spend with the clients that I was working with. I felt more of a partnership with the people that I was working with. And other places where I felt more like I was on an assembly line and just kind of cranking it out. And maybe 15 minutes with a client and then 15 minutes with another client, and really pushed to do lots of documentation. And so I learned the differences between these places, these settings, and essentially how I wanted to work, what I ultimately wanted to do based on that information. And then once I learned myofascial release and I could layer that into the settings that I worked in, it just added a whole nother dimension.
Got it. Now, I want to ask you, how did you make that transition? Like, what was a moment in your life where you're working in traditional occupational therapy settings and then feeling like, hey, it seems like you were very happy, you learned a lot of things. So, what prompted you to make a change?
So one of the things I had shared with you earlier is that I was pursuing an acting career at the time. And so honestly, I looked at occupational therapy prior to learning myofascial release. I looked at my occupational therapy as a job, as a way to make money. And pursuing acting was my career.
Mm.
So when I learned myofascial release and I could bring that into my work as an occupational therapist, it really shook me up because I knew that this was important. I loved doing it. I not only used it in the facilities that I worked in, but I was asking friends and family members to come over and let me treat them and let me work with them because it really brought in the right side of my brain that I'm really strongly right-brained. And it really allowed me to see how I could help people in this other way that I didn't even know about until I took my first myofascial release class. So I took what it was for me was seeing that I could use the work that I was doing in some of the settings, but I couldn't fully do what I wanted to do as a myofascial release therapist in those settings. And also realizing that my acting career was not going to serve me or serve the world in the way that I could as a myofascial release therapist. So I had to really let go of my pursuit of that acting career. And the way that I did that is as I started seeing clients privately, I'd get called for an audition and I had a client scheduled. I couldn't cancel a client because of an audition. I realized I couldn't do that. Whereas when I had an occupational therapy gig that was in a traditional setting, I would just say, I can't make it today. I've got something else I need to do. And I would go to the audition. So I started realizing I can't over time, I finally let go of my pursuit of acting and I really dove into my private practice. And once I made that choice to focus all of my energy on the private practice that I had started, it was transformational. It really changed everything once I committed to it. It's like that quote that John talks about, once you commit to something, all of a sudden things come out of the woodwork, resources and people and information comes to you that wasn't there before because now you're really committed to it. And that's definitely how it was for me. And and that's when I really started getting going with my practice and became a full-time private practice myofascial release therapist, and then eventually hired other therapists and office manager, started building a larger practice in New York.
I love that. That sounds like such a transformational journey. And I don't remember John saying that exact quote, but a book that I'm sure that resonates with a lot of us in this myofascial release community is The Alchemist. And he says something along the lines of when you commit to your goal, then the universe will conspire to help you achieve it. So it's just about you making that commitment, and then it's going to take risk. I think you have to engage a little bit of fears that you have around that. But when you are able to get centered and grounded, you'll realize that all these avenues and opportunities are opening up to you if you become aware of it. Now, the reason I ask you about your transition from traditional OT to now being an MFR therapist is I think oftentimes when we're in traditional settings, we get burnt out. I think you had viewed your occupational therapy traditional work as a job, whereas you thought of your acting and your modeling as your career. And I think those are two very distinct words we use because people hate their jobs, but people love their careers. And it's a matter of mindset on which direction that you choose. And people will generally make changes based on two reasons. Either you're trying to get away from pain or you're pursuing some sort of pleasure. And I'll just say that typically what prompts the actual change is the pain. And oftentimes I find that in my myofascial release practice, it's not until someone bears a certain amount of pain that they're not willing to take anymore that they'll pursue avenues to try to heal from it. But many people can live with the pains that they have until it becomes unbearable. Now, in an ideal world, I think that we'd be able to communicate with them and say, hey, if you don't want to deal with this extensive pain and it get worse, you could treat it early. But what I found is more often than not, it takes them to get to that level before they're willing to make that change. And for me, I know that when I was working in a traditional setting where I'm seeing multiple patients an hour, I'm spending time at home working on documentation that's just burning me out. There has to be that point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. And until you get to that point, you're going to convince yourself that, hey, this is what everyone does. When I'm looking at people around me, this is what they're saying is the life of a physical therapist for me. And it takes some level of, I don't know if it's craziness just to be like, I don't think this is it. Like I know everyone's doing this. Everyone is saying this is the only life that there is, but this isn't the life for me. So you kind of have to step into this unknown and trust your intuition. I think for me, I ended up quitting my job to take my first myofascial release seminar. And that sounds crazy when I say that out loud, because like who does that? Who just quits their job to take a seminar that they heard on an offhand podcast? But that's what I did. And looking back now, I could say, hey, maybe that was me following my intuition because it didn't make sense on paper, but it was something that I just felt called to do. And it's just like you said, once I committed to making that decision, every avenue opened up to help me support that. And it's not until I was able to step away from this life that I had gotten accustomed to, that I had built habits around and only knew that I was able to see this new path for me. Now, for you, I think you talked about a few different things. One, you're a very right brain person, and that means that you're very intuitive, creative, abstract, less structure. But as John calls this more of your channel 3 or where love is thought to be versus your channel 5, which is your left hemisphere, which is logical, linear, rational, often where fear is thought to be, impulsive as well. And so you're saying, hey, I'm more of this right brain, creative, intuitive person. And I found myofascial release that's helped me kind of embody this, which I had only found through acting and modeling. And I was only able to step away from modeling and acting, even though I thought that was my career, because I thought, hey, how can I serve the world better with the gifts that I have? How are you able to kind of keep this channel 3 sense about you in the endeavors that you choose to pursue?
Yes. Goodness. How can I say this? I feel that once you're in that river of channel 3, once you're in it and you've swum around in it, it's hard to get out of it. It's a place that I know well. And when I started my practice, it took more time and focus to really tap into it. And with meditation or breath techniques or other other things that I had learned over time that helped me stay present, which is where channel 3 lives, and very much in the present moment, when you're aware of everything going on all the time, in the moment, just not in my thoughts. And now, because I've had the great gift and benefit, partly through what I've built over time in my life. I worked hard to get to where I am. I've worked hard, but it was a joyful working hard. It wasn't like, oh, it was so hard. I mean, some of it was, don't get me wrong, but it was just I did it because I felt that, how can I say this? It was the only choice I had. I couldn't do it another way, because the other ways just felt like a part of me would die. A part of my soul would be left behind. So for me, that wasn't acceptable. I have to do it this way. And so tuning into that channel 3 side, where it's so much of who I am. And when you watch John, you see that. I mean, I'm not there where he is necessarily, but you can just see he's always in that channel 3 when he's walking around the room. I'll never forget. This is a story I want to share. I was at Cervical Thoracic, and I was in Ocean City, Maryland, and this was probably in the early 90s. And I had this experience. I had just had an unwinding experience, and I was feeling a lot of anger and rage that was just coming up. I could just feel it around me. And John was walking through the room, and as he came close to me, he went and he kind of backed up. I didn't say a word. He could feel that energy emanating from me. And I feel that now I'm in this place where, because I know that river, it's not, I can tune into it. It doesn't mean that there aren't days when I have a lot of channel 5 chatter that's still there. But one of the things that John says that helps me is to think about it like channels. Well, channels, of course, that's what he says. But all of the channels are always coming through all of the time, but then you're choosing to focus on this channel. I think of it as a river. I'm choosing to swim in this river of channel 3, even though the river of 5 is still kind of out there. I'm going to choose to go in this direction instead. And sometimes that channel 5 is chattering a little bit more, and it might require a little more feeling into my body, because I know what it feels like in my body now to be in that channel 3. And so proprioceptively and kinesthetically for me is my way. I'm very much a movement person, and feeling through those different senses. So I know what that feels like, and I can get back to that place. And then wherever that is, that's my launching pad. And then I can go from there. And I find that it has evolved over time and deepened over time. And with each person that I work with, it's different. My experience of it is different. And it's one of the things I love about this work, is because I never know what's going to happen. I never know how being in that river will create a form of connection with me, with a client, and how I'll be able to serve them by being in that place, every day, every person, even people that I've seen for years, every time they come in, it feels different.
I love that. So I think, just to make sure that we're on the same page, and for anyone who's new to myofascial release, I think commonly we think of the world in dualities. It's either this or that. It's either black or white. Whereas in myofascial release, what John is saying is there's two channels, channel 5 and channel 3. And if you're in channel 3, your channel 5 becomes better. It's not saying we need to get rid of channel 5. It just serves its purpose. But when it becomes the forefront, oftentimes we're stuck in our heads and we're not in that present moment. And an easy way to think about this, at least for me, is I know when I'm trying to figure something out and I'm in my head and the answers just aren't coming to me, I can get more stressed out about it. But what I've learned to do is if I take a walk out into nature, especially, and that's more channel 3, slowing things down, more kinesthetic, then the answers will somehow come to me, versus me chasing for this answer that never comes. It's attracting it by being in that present moment, and then those answers will flow through you. And I love your answer because you have gotten accustomed to this feeling of being in this absolute present moment, which is channel three. And I think that is where a lot of our intuition will guide us, is when we're still. And so I think I love the way that you put it. And it seems like you become very familiar with this feeling and you just always come back to it. And I am in channel three, especially when I'm a myofascial release therapist, when I'm helping and serving clients. But where my channel five traits pop out is the business ownership. It's like thinking you have to do X, Y, and Z, and those things are absolutely necessary. But then I find that I get into my head a lot. And I think it's always a good reminder to make sure you stay centered. And so when you're especially got a long to-do list, maybe you're a mom like yourself, you got to take care of kids, all these thoughts are coming into your head. But to remember to come back to this feeling that you're talking about. And I think that feeling is something that you do get more familiar with. And for me, as I've gotten accustomed to being more in channel three, it's recognizing and having faith that the answers will come to me versus my channel five is often impulsive and it's like, I need the answer. I need the answer now versus just being like, hey, maybe I just need a second to breathe a little bit. So I love that you have different practices to help you come back to this moment. And then it's this very familiar feeling that you have. Now, can you share with us your first experience with myofascial release? You had said you'd taken your first class in 1996. What was that like?
Oh, it was incredible. That term, your mind is being blown, I felt that completely. I really was blown because I had no idea how important the fascial system was. And so it was all new information to me that John was sharing immediately. As soon as he started talking about the fascial system and the implications for us as human beings, I was like, wow, I can't believe this is amazing. I was really resonated with it. And that class, I actually had some of my own pain at the time. I was starting to do triathlons, and the extra running was really aggravating my right hip. As we know, when we have fascial restrictions, if we're living a certain kind of life that's contained, we may not feel them as much. But then when we ask our bodies to do more, which is what I was doing, it was illuminating this restriction that I had that I didn't even know about until I started training. And I had seen a physical therapist, I'd seen a chiropractor and a massage therapist for about 2 years and wasn't getting much relief. So when I took my first class, that was in my spirit. I was starting to lose hope a bit. And as you know, the universe would have it, John asked me to be the demo on the last day. And so I had the opportunity to receive treatment from him and the four instructors who were there. It was a big class, it was over 100 students. And, again, I didn't at the time, I also, before I had my own treatment from him and the instructors, I had already been experiencing unwinding. My partners were beginning to unwind. And I also had some really interesting imagery come to me when I was receiving the work in the weekend. That's what I mean about my mind being blown. I thought, wow, there's this channel now I have access to. So anyway, and it freaked me out. The first time one of my partners unwound, I was like, what is going on? Because I hadn't seen it yet in the class. And Rob was there. He was one of the instructors, like, come over here, come over here. Oh, what is this? And then when I had the experience when I was on stage and I finally let go and began to unwind, it just felt so natural to be able to do that. And so I was one of those people who had a big emotion and I was upside down and moving around. And, I don't know how long it lasted. And when you're in that healing state, it can feel like hours or just a couple of minutes, but I don't know, probably 15, 20 minutes. But what happened is when I stood up after that experience, I felt so different. My body felt so much more fluid and, just I felt like I could move. But the biggest thing is I had no pain in my hip. None.
Mm.
It wasn't just less, it was gone. It was gone and it stayed gone. It never came back in the same way. So it blew my mind. And that was when I knew I needed to learn the work, because I thought, wow, if that can help me to that degree, what can I could help so many people doing this work.
I love that. And, a lot of people come into this work because they're trying to find solutions to their own pains. And my journey was a little different. I came in wanting to be a better therapist. And I had always thought when I'm treating patients, but especially earlier on in my career, where there's a note that physical therapists will write, and it will be patient was unresponsive to physical therapy. And it's because they're not making any progress. And I remember thinking to myself early on, is it really that they're unresponsive or do I not know enough to help them? And, being in my 20s, I always felt towards the latter where I was like, I just need to know more. I need to learn more. And I think this is something where I'm learning to trust, but it's those things that slow you down that are the most impactful. And why I mention that is because a lot of times when I'm being slowed down, I'll think of it as kind of a nuisance, like, oh, I'm not able to get the thing that I need to do. And with myofascial release, it really got me to slow down and be in this present moment and just to be still because I'm always thinking I got to be doing something. And it's been a journey because I used to think that I was wasting time or not really knowing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that was a belief system that I had to challenge. And John himself helped me crack because I remember thinking, when I was unwinding or learning to unwind, I would motor through still points. And I would say to John when he was teaching, I was like, what if I find that I'm motoring through? And he's like, is there anything wrong with being still? And that hit me deeply because I was like, there isn't anything wrong. So why do I feel like I should always be doing something? And just as a reminder, John says that your intuition responds to questions. So you never lead or force, but you can ask a question, and oftentimes that is asked more deeply, and then you feel that. And, I remember being a huge skeptic. I was John's biggest skeptic. It's just like, there's no way this is real. When you see someone unwind on stage the first time, you're like, what is for me, I was like, what is going on? There's no way this is happening. Like, this is like a paid actor or something. Like, and just thinking to myself, like, so you're telling me that all we have to do is put our hands on people, reach down to the depth barrier, nudge into the depth barrier, and wait. And they're gonna do this? And inevitably, that's what happened. Like when I was working on people in my first seminars, they would unwind. I'm like, what is going? And I used to be like, yeah, they're dealing with a lot of stuff. When someone would unwind violently and have this anger come, like, yo, they're dealing with a lot of stuff, right? And now that I've become one of those people where I'm rolling on the ground and like spewing all this stuff out, I'm like, wow, everybody has that in them. Everybody has that in them. And so, I think John has a way of finding the right people to demo on. And for me, I had taken a vacation series for my first series and just very skeptical. There's a little bit of maybe anxiety or fear about it, but I mustered enough courage to ask him to be a demo on the stage. Just trying to be like, what's this unwinding thing? And I remember thinking, like, maybe this is something only John can do, even though I had helped facilitate some unwindings. But I still thought to myself, because I'm in Channel 5, like, maybe it's just something that John does. And there's definitely something that John will do when he's teaching a seminar, where he'll fill the seminar room up with his energy, and it feels different. Like, it's very subtle, but for me, I can sense it. And I remember going on stage, and I developed this reputation of being the skeptic. And so it was a very interesting encounter. And I remember him working on me. He was working on my abdomen, and my arms and legs started to float and go in their different directions. And I described it as being like kites. And they were tethered to strings, and the strings are in the middle of my abdomen where John was working. And so I felt like he was very present and, facilitating this process. And I remember, getting up and he asked if I wanted to share anything. And I said, I think anyone can do this work. Like I think that because I was thinking like, oh, you just got to put your hands here, da da da. Now I know it's also the centeredness of the therapist. Like when you are truly centered, present, and intentional, that's where the patient will feel that and be able to trust you more, to be able to let go and unwind. It's a very vulnerable place to be, and there does have to be some trust involved on both sides. But after that experience, I was like, okay, I don't think he's doing anything out of the ordinary. That I was someone who was like, okay, I think anyone could do this work, and I think I could do this work. And then as I've gone deeper into the work, I realized there's more of this energetic component. Now, when you took your first series or your first seminar, after that, did you just become an MFR junkie and you're like, okay, this is who I am now, this is what I'm doing? Or was there more of a longer transition period for you?
Yeah, it was longer, but I just want to say thank you for sharing that story.
You're
You
welcome.
described it so creatively and so beautifully. The kites and being tethered. I could really see it, the imagery of it. Yeah.
You're welcome.
You're tuned into the right side of your brain for sure.
I,
Yeah.
I am, but I convinced myself that I'm not. So it's an
Uh,
interesting conundrum. But I don't know if that's a struggle that other people have. It's like if you just trust the way that you feel, and it's because we've never been taught that, or I've never been taught that, to have a safe space to feel your emotions and to be able to express that is something that I'm only learning now in my adult life. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, just trust the way you feel. It's so simple, right? But I think it's because when you're in channel five and you're in your head, you can convince yourself any which way you want. And you can come up with information or things to support any decision. But when you really settle down and be still, how you feel about something deeply is how you feel about it. But I think a lot of times we'll question that and we'll say, oh, well, this data will support this or the numbers show this. But your intuition is guiding you in a direction, and oftentimes it won't make sense. And it won't make sense because, hey, it's not the outcome that you expected or that you wanted, but it's leading you to something what I consider your greater purpose in life. And so for me, being part of this myofascial release community and learning that, it's like, hey, I have the ability to serve others in a much bigger and deeper way that I didn't know existed. But going up through school and all these, math especially, it's like, well, these numbers support this, and this is where, the biggest number exists. And so you should chase that. And what I've learned is that's not necessarily the right way to do it. And the best thing that could happen for you is that it doesn't work out. And that might be disheartening in the moment. But if you become successful becoming this person that causes to you to feel more of like an empty shell where like your soul and your spirit aren't connected to that, then you might be successful in the world's eyes, but you will know that there's a part of you that is dying or dead. And so I would say if you are chasing those things, and I would say early on in my business journey where I was, it's like, oh, I need to make a lot of money. I need to do this. I became this version of myself that was honestly just unhappy. And I took my first T for T to recognize those belief systems and let those things go. I was like trying to prove it to myself or to the world. And that like this prove it energy is not where you want to be. But yeah, I thank you for complimenting me on my description of my journey or my experiences. And yeah, I'm glad that you got something out of that. Can you share anything on those lines that maybe you've experienced in your own life and journey?
Yes, so you said so many rich things just now, and I could relate to so many of them. Yeah, I would say that, one of the things that you were talking about and what it was for me the path that I've taken in my life, there are people in my life, family members, let's say, who look at the choices that I've made and say, you have so much courage to do that. You're so brave and so good at risk taking to be able to do that. And I stop and I think, it doesn't feel like that to me. Maybe that's true and that's how people see it. But for me, it's always been, this is what I need to do because to save myself, right? To save my soul, to save who I am. I have to do it. I have to take these chances. I have to take these risks because to not do those things would mean, like you said, just giving away a part of myself or not fully embracing who I am. So Everything that I've done has been, I've been driven to do this in a way. I, it did take me time to go back to the question you asked about after I took my first class. Now, I will say that I was hooked on myofascial release and fascia. I was definitely hooked. And that's when I really started asking friends and family to come over so I could work with them and treat them. And when I moved to New York, that's when I started attending a study group and receiving my treatment myself. So I was definitely hooked, but it took me a while to get to the place where I was ready to really start building a practice and really start seeing clients privately. So it did take me more time. I took my first class in 1996 and I took my second class in 1999. So 3 years later, it took me that long to take my next class. And then it was off and running. Once I took that second class, I really wanted to learn more. And I quickly was asked to assist John in his classes. And then he asked me to present some of his classes in 2008, pediatrics first. And now I present MFR1 and I present DVD and fascial pelvis. So I've been so honored to be able to do that. And I love broadcasting the work. I love teaching other practitioners the work that we do. So I feel very honored to be able to do that. In fact, I'm going to Kentucky next week, Covington, Kentucky, to present MFR1. So trying to think of, you said so many things, and I'm having to harken back to some of the things you said about your path. And yeah, that's one of the things that really, you talked about we have to be a little crazy, to do this work or to be willing to make these choices that we make. And maybe so. I think to be a creative person or an entrepreneur, there is this element of being willing to take risks and to be a little crazy, to be a little on the edge of things. And I would say that, like you were sharing, if you want something, if you ask for something, you have an intention that for something you want to make manifest, the main thing for me has been to let go of how I'll get there. If you're really attached to the path that will take you there, I think that's what you were talking about. If your mind is telling you, oh, well, I have to do A, B, C, D, E, that's what I'm going to have to do in order to achieve this, then you're going to be missing out on this whole other world of possibility. In my experience, if there's something I want to achieve or intend, if I can let go of that, it's hard to do. I mean, I still do it. I still make lists. But if I can let go of that and I can allow what comes and then tune in to whether that's the right way to go, then eventually I do get to what it is that I want to achieve, and usually a lot faster than I would have if
You
I'd been
got it.
following these lists, these to-dos.
You got it. And I love that. And just to reframe it, I think crazy, the word crazy has a negative connotation with it. And it's crazy because not everyone's doing it. But if you were to ask me, it's like, "Oh, hey, do you want to continue for the next 30 years getting burnt out and taking documentation home and living that life? Or would you rather take this risk and potentially have a life fulfillment? Which decision would you take? And for us, it seems like it's just, of course, there's definitely a best answer for that, right? But I think so many people are fearful of the unknown and they don't have this spirit or soul tied to it where they'll just say, well, this is safe. I'm getting a paycheck every month. I don't have to worry about, the business side of things and I'm good to go. And it's like, okay, I get that. And to each their own. If anyone's choosing that path, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes I'll feel like I'm so far ahead, and it's not even being ahead of anybody, it's just being like, this could be the reality. Like, you could actually heal from your pains, and you don't have to suffer for as long as you're putting yourself through. Like, that's kind of the decision that I'm making, or the way that I process it. And so the reason why I think sometimes it's seen as crazy is because not everybody is willing to do that. And I do think that there's something about you that you're like, yo, I just want to do my own thing because you are signing up for more work, quote unquote, but it's work that's fulfilling. It's like something that you get to pursue your passion or your joy, creativity, things like that. And so all of your energy is directed towards that. And I can understand, like, hey, not everybody wants to do that, which is totally fine. But also recognizing, hey, it doesn't have to be this huge, like cannonball, all or nothing. I think something I asked you before we started this podcast is, when did you start your MFR business? And you had said you started seeing private clients. And I was like, interesting that you word it like that. Instead of you saying, hey, I started my business or my MFR practice, here you just kind of said, I started seeing private clients. And I think that's all it has to be. Whereas, there's nothing admirable if you just say, like, oh, I'm going to quit my job, start my myofascial release, and my family's going to suffer because I want to do this thing for me? Whereas what I'm hearing from you, it's like, okay, there's this nudge and I feel called towards this. But I'm not going to quit everything that I've done and just go all in. I'm just going to start seeing private clients on the side, seeing where that goes? And then inevitably, what I would imagine, and you can share more detail, is you start building clients because the work is actually helping them. And once that spreads, you can then make that transition and be like, okay, I think I could do this myofascial release thing full time. But can you talk us through that particular journey?
Yes, and it was like that. When I was in New York City and I had been pursuing an acting career and I was working in different facilities as a temp therapist, I I was bringing in the myofascial release work to the temp places, and the people were really receiving benefit from it. And so when they would get discharged, they would ask me, "Are you doing this privately? Can I see you privately?" And I thought, "Huh, I guess I could do that. I think I can do that." So I started doing that, and that's really how I started seeing clients privately, was because the facilities that I was working in, I was treating clients and then they would go home and then they would come to see me for treatment. And so for me, it was a combination of needing to let go of both my pursuit of the acting career, which I was finally able to let go of because I knew I couldn't cancel clients, but also then letting go of that financial stability. It pushed me away, to be honest. I was pushed out of it because I had taken on a temp job or part-time job as an occupational therapist in a school setting that I thought would serve me. It was less hours and more pay, but it turned out to be something completely different that I wasn't anticipating. I didn't get the information correctly, so I quit the first day. I was like, I can't do this. And so I thought, I have enough money to live for 3 months. I'm going to just see what I can do with my private clients. And that was all I needed. I just needed that nudge to just put all of my focus and all of my attention, knowing that I could survive for 3 months, what I had saved up. And that's what I did. And it took off from there. That's when I finally started working full time in my practice, and everything kind of built from there. But for me, it was having to let go of that attachment to having to have this extra income. I really didn't need it, but I didn't know that until I was in a situation where it was intolerable. And I thought, well, I don't really want to look for something else right now. I'm going to see what I can do.
I
Yeah.
love that. And
Time.
and just to encourage anyone who's pursuing myofascial release, it's not uncommon to have that story like Molly, where you start seeing private clients and then the word spreads like wildfire and then you build this successful practice. My experience has been a little different and it's a little bit of slower growth, but I think that's my journey and my path because otherwise my ego would have gotten inflated. So it's recognizing that and saying, "Hey, God is guiding me along my journey and not to compare myself to anyone else. I can say, "Hey, Molly's great. It's fantastic. I'm happy for her." And versus being like, "Man, how come it's working for her and it's not working for me?" That's just not the place you want to be. And comparison is the thief of joy. And so I could just be supportive of Molly or any other therapist, as a matter of fact, and recognizing with that, hey, my journey is a little different and I'm supposed to learn different lessons. But I do have confidence and faith that eventually I will have a fully booked practice and that will grow. Now, with my growth in my practice, I'm at a stage where I am thinking about bringing on another therapist or another couple of therapists. Now, I have fears around that. One, I'm the youngest of four brothers, so I've always just kind of followed what the family has done, and so I have these, I don't know if they're real or unrealized fears of like, am I able to lead? Now, I think you had mentioned that you had gotten to a place where you had hired on other therapists. Can I just ask, what was that like and what were the challenges you found with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, you're going to be amazing at this. I can just so you want you to know that.
Thanks.
Yeah. I actually have a larger practice in Keene than I did in New York. So I'll think about so for me, it was similar in that I had a lot of clients. I had a large waiting list, and I thought I really want to bring someone on. And part of my motivation was I thought, if I were starting out, like when I started out, I would have loved to have worked for someone like me.
Mhm.
I would have loved to have worked for someone who could mentor me and help kind of create this environment, this like incubator space that I could learn in and become a better myofascial release therapist in. So that was part of the motivation for me too, is to serve the clients that I had, to also make more money for my practice and for myself, and also to mentor. So I would say that initially it is challenging because interviewing someone and trying to understand what they need and who they are can be really challenging. I definitely made mistakes, and I've gotten to the place now where one of the big things is that I ask potential therapists is, what would make them happy? What is it that they want? What is it that they need? Because if they're not going to be happy working in the practice, then that's never going to work out. So that's a big question I ask, is to try to get a feel of what they want to get out of the experience of working at my practice. And the therapists who are really interested in doing this work, the myofascial release work, the therapists who are really interested in serving clients and really get excited about what they can do to help people, and who are really interested in that interaction with people, with their clients on a day-to-day basis, and also want to work in a facility. Our space is not large. We have 3 treatment rooms. So there's a lot of interaction between us that happens throughout the day. People who are comfortable being in a small environment and interacting with people, those kinds of things make a big difference. And then, it's the financial pieces. It can be challenging because I can't afford to pay them the amount of money that the local nursing home can pay them, or the local home health places can pay them. So there has to be a different motivation for them to work at my practice. And so that still is a big challenge that I encounter, is the financial implications of working at my practice. And let's see, what else can I share with you about that? And then once they start, I've been fortunate that I now have a pretty good group of therapists who've been working for me for a while, and they love the work and they've continued to work, but they're mostly part-time. They have other jobs that they do, and they love the work that they do for me. So I've definitely had full-time therapists, and that has also worked out. But that's just a bigger piece, because I provided health insurance and other benefits. You get into all of that when you start taking people on full time, and that presents its own challenges. But I think it's been such a great learning for me, and I've really enjoyed it. I really love having this practice and being able to support so many people. I think of it as, I'm supporting the community, the clients who come to the practice, but also the therapists who come. It brings me a lot of joy to pay them, every 2 weeks, and say, hey, I have enough money. I can pay people and support their lives. And it's really, really exciting.
I love that. It gives me something to look forward to versus something like, man, this is going to be a big thing. Am I capable? Versus being like, yeah, I get to facilitate their journey in whichever way that they are looking. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on is you refer to yourself or identify with being a shamanic practitioner. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, good question. So that means that I journey shamanically in order to gather healing information, wisdom, information for a client who's seeking that out. In its essence, being a shaman, or the word shaman, comes from the Tungus word that means one who sees in the dark. So when you're a shamanic practitioner, what differentiates you from other forms of healing is that you're going on a journey into other forms of reality to bring back information that's helpful for the person you're working with, the client you're working with. So that's what a shamanic practitioner is you're You work with power animals. You have a power animal that you work with and you trust. And usually by the time you're a shamanic practitioner, you've been doing this work for a while and you've developed a relationship with the power animal and you align with a power animal that you feel you really trust, so that when you go on the journey, you know that you'll get what you need when you're going out on the journey. So I started my shamanic practice, it was probably 2004, but I learned about shamanism in the early 2000s. Similar to the way I learned about myofascial release, I just stumbled upon it. I was at a yoga space and they were advertising a drumming circle, and I thought it was a djembe drumming circle because being in New York City, you go to Central Park and you see the West African people drumming and dancing, and it's just so much fun. And that's what I was expecting, but it wasn't. It was a shamanic drumming circle. And again, my mind was blown. They invited us to do journeys for each other for healing. And I got information for this person. And I remember thinking, that is crazy. She's never going to believe me, or I can't tell her about this. But then I thought, it's New York City. And when am I ever going to see her again? If I don't ever want to come back, I don't have to. So I thought I'm just going to share. What the hey? And it meant she immediately started crying. It meant so much to her. The information I got for her, it was so similar to me, to the work we do in myofascial release, in that often when we're treating a client, I specialize in soul retrieval when I do shamanic practice. And in myofascial release sessions, I was already noticing what I would call a spontaneous soul retrieval, when a person would let go of what was stuck in their bodies and then open up to the information that was available to them. And you could see the energy come back into their bodies. I would call that a spontaneous soul retrieval. In the shamanic work, it's the practitioner is going on a journey on behalf of the client intentionally to retrieve the soul part and bringing it back. Whereas one of the differences I see is that in myofascial release, we're focusing on releasing the restrictions in the body, and then maybe a soul piece will come back, maybe not, but that might be part of the process. Whereas when I'm doing my shamanic work, I'm intentionally going to retrieve that part on behalf of the client. So,
Wow,
yeah.
that is powerful. Now, all sorts of wonder and amazement, just thoughts coming through me. Now, to bring it back to myofascial release, something you had mentioned was a power animal, and John talks about power animals in myofascial release. His happens to be the cougar, and so he'll reference that. Now, for someone who doesn't know what their power animal is, how would you encourage them about how to find it?
So the way I found mine and the way I lead people to finding theirs is through a shamanic journey, intentionally going to meet a power animal. Now, the thing is that when you start doing shamanic journey work, often when you go out on the journey and you start connecting to these other worlds and power animals and spirit guides, they're that world is so excited that you're there. They're just so thrilled and happy that you're attending to them, that sometimes you just get bombarded. And that's what it was like for me. I had so many animals coming my way, and it took me 2 years to discern which one was the one I was aligned with in this life. We all are aligned with a power animal in this life that's meant to help us with our purpose in this life. This is my belief, whether we know it or not, this is what we have available to us. And there are other power animals there that you can work with, which I do over time. When I do soul retrieval work, I work with a different power animal, but my main power animal is always there. I always see my main power animal around, always around,
Which is
when I'm working
what?
with an eagle.
An eagle. You do have eagle energy. And so when you're doing your work, you perceive this eagle around you, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, so I go on a journey, I get into a journey space, which is very similar to the channel 3, and maybe it could be the same thing, into that expansive journey space. And I use a drum. So when I do my shamanic work, I either drum myself or I put on a drumming CD music, and that helps me get into that state of focus and expansion. And so that's how I do it. And when when I work with people and I guide them to finding power animals, I will do the drumming for them. It's also, let me just say that for me anyway, the shamanic work, because I learned from indigenous cultures, there's a ceremonial and ritual aspect to it. So when I do shamanic work, I'm always acknowledging the directions. I sage the whole space. I have different objects that are present on an altar that I work with. So it's all of this has power. All of the different pieces of the work have power and support me in the process.
I love that. I remember early on in my myofascial release journey, I was curious about this whole power animal dynamic. And I remember asking John in seminars, like, how do you find your power animal? And he would say something like, just quiet yourself and remember maybe you were drawn to certain animals as kids. So maybe tonight you just sit still and see what comes up. And I remember sitting in the hotel room at the time. Oh man, I think I see paws. I think I see some paws. Maybe it's a big cat. Yeah, but nothing would come up. And then I remember taking a seminar in Sedona and I kept asking about these power animals again. And I remember at night, I was on some preservation land in Sedona. That's where my Airbnb was. And I remember falling asleep and I was looking for my power animal in my dream. It was me and my Airbnb host. We were like running around. It seemed like the Middle East, there's a lot of sand looking for my power animal. And I remember that in my dream, it was about to be revealed to me what my power animal was. And a red and black snake jumped out at me, and I woke up. And I'll never forget this. I looked at the clock, and it was 2:22. And I'm not someone who looks for these signs or these numbers, but I thought it was very peculiar that I woke up as 2:22, and it was this idea of this snake. Now, there's a negative connotation towards snakes. And originally I was like, nah, am I really a snake? I don't want to be a snake. And kind of going back and forth with that. And then there was like this animal fire thing that the Airbnb was hosting in a teepee. And I remember going in because I was like, yo, I'm on this power animal kick. This is about animals. Let's just see what this is about. And I remember there was a red and black tapestry right behind her. And I was like, okay, I think this is it. I just have to be willing to accept it. And as I've gotten more familiar with it, because I remember thinking like, oh man, snakes have this negative connotation. They're, kind of scaly and all this stuff. And she was like, yes. And, snake energy or serpent energy is the way of the Kundalini. Or pharaohs would have cobras, So she helped me kind of reframe like this negative connotation. And then as I've explored more about snakes and learned more about them, I don't have this icky feeling about them. And actually, for me, it's like, oh, okay, I'm grounded. It's like I'm very close to the earth, and that's where I need to be. And so that's how I came about my power animal story. And I don't necessarily say I can sense a snake or serpent when I'm treating, but maybe that's this next step if I can invite him or into this space to help me facilitate the healing process.
Yeah, I would actually say too to you that your main power animal might not be a snake. It may be that the snake is coming to you for a purpose. There's something you
Mm.
need to learn from the snake, and that there is another power animal that you're aligned with. Could be a snake, definitely could be. I think that's something I would invite people to explore is that you don't have to put so much pressure on yourself to say, I want to find the power animal, because it may be that others come to you that are meant to help you with whatever you're dealing with in this life. And that over time, if you continue to connect, others might appear, and eventually you will find yourself very connected and aligned with a specific power animal over time. It took me 2 years. And even then I thought, wow, an eagle, that's a lot of power. I was a little afraid of it. So
Hmm.
it took me even more time to really fully accept and integrate that being my power animal. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I agree with that. I remember when I was talking about power animals and the seminar participants who were around me, I was like, I think I'm a platypus. This platypus is calling to me, and they're like, platypus. And so it's not until I had this dream where I was like, okay, that's the one that resonates more deeply. After it taking some time, because I think for you, you're like, am I an eagle? That seems like it's very powerful. And I think for you, you're in this work more deeply and can explore that. And maybe I'll reach out to you at some point and say, hey, let's do some shamanic journeying and seeing where that's at.
Yeah, and I would say too, the eagle is always challenging me to rise to his level. I think
Mm,
this eagle that I work with is usually male, sometimes female, but so I feel that the eagle is, I'm still working toward accepting it. I think it's a lifelong process. Do you know what I mean? I'm always
100%.
becoming in that. And the other thing, it's funny that you said that about the snake, because when I lead people on shamanic journeys, I always tell them, whatever comes to you is powerful. Even an ant or a little, mosquito has a lot of power. So it's important to let yourself work with whatever comes. It doesn't mean that that's who you're going to be stuck with for life, but they're really important. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think the lessons for me to learn from the serpent or the snake is to be able to shed these layers and transform into the next version of myself. Whereas a lot of times I feel like I'm so tied to who I am that it stops me from becoming who I'm meant to be.
Oh,
So,
yes. Beautiful. Yes.
yeah. Now, on that note, how do people find you?
Oh, as a shamanic practitioner?
As a myofascial release therapist and shamanic practitioner to work
Okay.
with you. Yeah.
Yes. So through my practice in Keene, New Hampshire, that's how you would find me as a myofascial release practitioner. So I've got my email address, which is Molly at monadnockmfr.com. That's a mouthful.
Go ahead and spell that for us.
Yes. MONADNOCKMFR.com. The other, with my shamanic work, I've created a retreat experience where I blend fascial movement and shamanic work. And I've been doing this for about 10 years, and it's called powerretrievalretreats.com. And that's
Love
how
it.
you find me to do shamanic work.
Perfect. So if anyone wants to work with Molly, that's how you find her. Now, before we get out of here, are there any last things you would like to share with my audience?
Oh, I just want to say I'm really grateful to have had this conversation with you. It's been wonderful sharing with you and hearing what you have to say and share. And one of the things I was thinking about before starting this interview that we do as practitioners for our clients so much. And one of the big things is being able to witness someone. When you talk to someone about what they're going through or what's happening for them, as a practitioner, we have the honor and the privilege of really being witness to their experience and how much that helps them. It really helps people to be witnessed and feel supported in who they are. And I feel that with this interview, I feel, and it's very rare for me to feel witnessed. So thank you for that. I just want to say thank you for being a witness.
You're very welcome, and the feeling is mutual. I've very much enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being open and honest with us. I think we shared a lot of insights that not only I learned from, but I know that listeners will learn from as well. So thank you for your time, effort, and energy. And until next time, and stay in Channel 3.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.